Hi everyone, it's Manny here again. Welcome back to another episode of Embroidery Hub. On today's episode, we're going to cover the topic of 3D puff embroidery. Now for those who may not be familiar with the topic, 3D puff embroidery, essentially what it is being able to add a sense of depth to your design. So as an example, we actually have here two different hats embroidered. One, as you can see here, is just a regular flat design, whereas on this hat, we actually have a 3D effect. As you can see, there's a bit of depth on the hat itself, and it adds a sense of depth on the hat itself. Now this is helpful for embroiderers because essentially it's a way where you can actually charge a bit extra for these designs to your customers, and it's very cost effective because you're actually just going to utilize one more material that is actually very cheap where you can find it anywhere. Now when it comes to the actual material that you're going to have to utilize with 3D puff embroidering, it's very quite simple. Firstly, you're going to have the foam itself. So the foam is what's actually going to add that sense of depth to your design. Essentially, you're just going to be stitching over the foam itself. These foams, you can pick them up anywhere in any arts and crafts stores. We actually picked these up at Walmart at a very low cost. So yeah, it's very cost effective. And they come in various colors as well. Speaking of colors, that's going to be another important thing to note here, is that the color that you're going to choose, make sure that it's the actual color of the 3D section of the design itself. What I mean by that is that, for example, in this design here, I know that the red section on the logo itself is going to be the actual part that's going to be puffed out in 3D. So for that reason, my foam should essentially be red. Now, the reason why we're going to utilize orange in this example is just to demonstrate why you actually want to choose the actual color so that you can see the differences. Now, another material that you're going to need is scissors, of course, to cut up the foam itself. You're going to need tape. Tape is going to be very important, and I'll explain why later when we're actually hooping the foam itself on the hat. And that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and go on over to the machine itself, where we're going to start embroidering on the hat. Okay. So we have our cap here already hooped onto the machine itself, all set and ready to go. But before we actually get started, one thing that I want to note here is the design. So the design itself is going to be very important that it's actually digitized for 3D puff embroidery specifically. The reason why I say that is because the order in which the design is going to be stitched is going to be very important. For 3D, the way that it goes is that it actually stitches the underlay of the design first, then it'll do the border, and then finally the final step will actually be the 3D section of the design itself. Now, since there are these differences of stages on the 3D puff, the reason why the 3D section is left to the end is because that is when you're actually going to place the foam itself. For the first steps, you're going to let it stitch onto the hat itself without the foam. Then we'll add the foam. So for this reason, it's going to be very important that we actually change the machine from fully automatic to automatic/manual. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned, it's going to do the different steps of the stitching. Once it does the underlay, it's going to stop and wait for me to come and hit start again before it switches to the next step, which is the border. I'll hit start, it'll do the border, and then when it's finished, it's going to stop once again before it continues. And the reason why I wanted to stop at that point is because that is where I'm going to come and actually place the foam, and then I'll hit start to start doing the final section, which is the 3D puff section with the foam already in place. So we've already gone ahead, we've chosen our colors, we've traced the design, and we're good to go. So we're just going to go ahead and get started on the design itself. Okay, so the machine has now finished embroidering the first part of the design. As you can see, it's done the underlay and it's done the outline of the design. So since we had it in automatic manual mode, it actually stopped before moving forward. And the reason why we want that is because now that it's going to actually stitch the 3D section, this is where we actually have to put the foam itself. So essentially all we're going to do is place the foam on the hat itself, and this is where the pieces of tape come in. So what you're going to use the tape for is to essentially tape the side of the foam onto the hat itself so that the foam can stay in place. Okay. Now, as you can see, I did it on the edge of the foam. Essentially, I could have cut out the foam a bit smaller, just the size of what the design itself was going to be. But then you could imagine that it's going to be a very hard time keeping it in place and actually embroidering on the foam itself. That's why I just cut it oversized. And I gave myself room so that the needle wouldn't go into the area of the tape itself. So now that this is in place, I'm actually going to hit start to start the embroidery of the 3D puff section. And one thing that I want you to know is that this is another point in why the design itself has to be digitized for 3D embroidering, because when it comes to keeping the foam in place, part of the digitizing for 3D embroidering is that it's actually going to do what's known as stitch point. That is actually what embroiders onto the hat itself to kind of hold the foam in place to begin with, and then it'll actually start doing the rest of the design. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just get it started. Now that was the first stitch point, and that was the second stitch point. And from here, now it's actually going to start doing the full embroidery. All right, so here we have our finished product. I'm going to go ahead and remove the cap from the cap driver, and we're going to show you exactly how it is that you remove the foam itself. Okay, so when it comes to removing the actual foam itself, essentially it's going to be basically like tear away. You're just going to go ahead and just tear it right off. So you can see that came off cleanly. You're going to also have to remove the ones from the inside as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, and there you have it. Now, one thing that I want to point out, if you can see here, from the design itself, there are a bit of sections where you can still see a bit of the orange bleeding through the red 3D puff section. And this is the reason why at the beginning of the video we mentioned that the color that you use, you want it to match essentially the color that it's going to be used on the 3D section. Now, it's not a big deal if you can't find the actual color itself. If you can find a color that's similar or close enough, that will do just fine, because actually these little sections that are popping out, what you can do is that you can actually utilize a heat gun and it'll actually shrink in and essentially remove those bits of pieces that are popping out. So what we're going to do here is I actually have a lighter here. Now a lighter is a good alternative if you don't happen to have a heat gun, and just apply some heat. Just make sure that when you're doing it, you're actually just kind of letting the heat go on top of it. You don't want to place the flame on it itself, because then you're just going to create burn marks on the design itself. Okay. And little by little, you start getting rid of those sections that are popped out. All right, so here we have our finished product. I've gone ahead and finished basically cleaning it up at the end. What we used was the burning technique, as I mentioned before, and another thing that was very helpful was just taking a set of snips or any other thing that has a fine point and kind of just poking on the edges themselves to kind of just continue to push in that excess foam that's popping out. Again, I'm only having to really do this really detailed only because we used a different color, but if the foam would have essentially been the same color, then it would be barely noticeable at all. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And that is how you embroider 3D puff embroidery. I want to thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to our channel. Feel free to comment if you have any questions regarding this video. I also want to invite you to join our Facebook group, Embroidery and Custom Apparel Mastery, where you can join other embroiderers and apparel decorators such as yourself. In it, you could ask questions and share tips and knowledge among one another. And for any additional information about our products and services, you can visit www.ricoma.us. You'll find all these links I mentioned in the description below. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here next time.